Joining us now on the Oakland County Megacast is Karen Faith Gordon. She is the owner of Karen Faith LLC, providing a number of geriatric services right here in the Oakland County area. Karen, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Tyler. Thank you.
I appreciate having you on. Before we get into more of the details, can you just give us an overview of some of the services that you provide through your business?
Yes, I am a licensed clinical social worker specializing in geriatrics. I accept insurance and Medicare and supplemental insurance, which means that much of the work I do is clinical, people dealing with depression, anxiety, stress, isolation, new diagnoses, and how that affects both the person who's now coping with a diagnosis and their loved ones who are facing a transition, a decline potentially in their loved ones. So I work a lot one-on-one with individuals, with couples, with families who are working to navigate this journey of aging and what it looks like for each of us.
I'd be pretty certain that the COVID-19 pandemic, the impact of the last 2.5+ years, has only made that need for those services and the severity of the symptoms that lead to the need for those services so much more significant, and make what you do and what others in your field do so much more important for the more elderly members of our population here.
Yes. Thank you for noting that. It's true. The pandemic has amplified exponentially the issues of aging that would come normally and yet now have been in a way intensified by the isolation that the pandemic caused for so many people, especially for clients or for people, and many of my clients who do not have family locally or don't have family or have family members who are placed across the country. And those family members reach out to me seeking information. They want eyes on their loved one. They want to know what they can do, even from afar, to support and guide them in the decisions that need to be made as we get older.
And it's interesting too, because in so many situations, when you have a person reach that age where they start to make some of these considerations, or they start to understand really that they may not be as functional as they'd been before, that their memory may not be as great as before, that's something that's really hard for them to cope with, which leads to some of those issues like depression that you spoke about. And even beyond that, naturally, there are certain ailments that come along with age. How do you work with these individuals and with their families on top of that to help them combat these issues, which often are coinciding with one another and only make dealing with one versus the other or one individually that much tougher?
Yes, people are often, especially again, in light of the pandemic, there is a sense of feeling startled at the changes that people are recognizing in their loved ones, especially because time together has been so very limited these last 2 years. And so changes that might otherwise have been noticed earlier have not been noticed, or they are things have not been addressed that would have been addressed prior to the pandemic, such as going to the doctor for something. So how I work with families is to, first of all, assure them that what they're experiencing is very much within the scope of, let's say, normal. I hesitate to say normal because we are each different. We have our unique nuances in every single one of us as humans. However, the pervading theme that comes through to me with my families and clients that I see is this sense of deep aloneness, a sense of I am the only one who is experiencing this thing that's happening, and how could anyone ever understand? And the truth is, there are a lot of people experiencing these issues right now, and my voice is one of reassurance and one to guide and offer tools and ways to communicate and have what would otherwise be very difficult conversations, especially when it's between family members who may or may not have already had great communication patterns established. So I, as a third neutral party, being able to come in and facilitate those conversations, whether they're about the diagnosis, what family members, spouses are observing in their loved ones and how to cope with that, end of life conversations, debunking the myths around what hospice actually is and palliative care, what it may look like if someone needs to relocate, it can no longer stay safely at home. These are the conversations I'm immersed in on a daily basis.
And these are also conversations that, as you said, they're tough to have, and they're often, because they're so tough to have, from a logistical standpoint, because not everybody is an expert like you, and that's why you go to businesses like yours, Karen. But also because in some cases, the person that we're having that conversation about may be in denial about the need for that sort of a conversation, or simply their family members. It's a loved one, it's someone you care about, that you're very close with. You don't want to have that conversation. You have to come to terms with the fact that someone in your family or someone you love deeply is on their way out and may be dying very soon or may need additional care in order to maintain any sort of quality of life. What suggestions do you have then for these families and for these individuals alike to go into those conversations and begin to discuss those necessary moves that need to be made, for quality of life of the individual, but also for transitioning them as their life may be coming to an end?
What I like to do is invite people into a conversation. On the other side of that denial and avoidance and resistance to those conversations, actually are gifts of possibility for connection, possibility to learn new things that might not have been learned had the conversation not been approached. I invite people to think about the ways in which they can connect and let's say, restart a new chapter that provides new opportunities, new possibilities. Yes, it may be in the context of end of life, yet how can we honor that and be with it be with those feelings, be present to the experience without feeling like we want to run away or be overwhelmed by it, and truly processing those emotions and feelings in a safe space and having the courage to show up and be vulnerable, and allowing someone like me to guide and facilitate and navigate those conversations. I find it a true honor and privilege to be able to be in that space with families.
We're joined by Karen Faith Gordon. She is the owner of Karen Faith LLC, joining us on the Oakland County Megacast. You can go to karenfaith.llc for more information on her services as well as resources on all these matters. Again, that's karenfaith.llc, and we're joined by Karen Faith Gordon, the owner of Karen Faith LLC. You can also find her on a number of different social media. You can find her on LinkedIn. You can also find her at Karen Faith LLC on Instagram and Karen Faith LLC on Facebook as well. Karen, those conversations, having them early can have such an important impact on making those decisions down the line, but also not having to worry about some of the back and forth and the arguing that can often naturally occur when you're having those conversations in the moment of need. I've had similar conversations preemptively with my dad as a result of the experiences that he, his sisters, and his brother went through with my grandfather, and even with, to some extent, with my grandmother, mostly with my grandfather, particularly when it was time for him to no longer safely be behind the wheel driving. My dad and I and my brother have had that conversation, to which my dad just basically said, this is what happened with my dad, this is what happened with your grandfather. In this case, Tyler, when it's time, take my keys away from me. I'm putting that on you because your brother probably won't do it. You, on the other hand, you won't take no for an answer. So those conversations are important. We laugh at it right now, and I think even in the moment, hearing that conversation, having that conversation with my dad and my brother made me chuckle, because I see it as, oh, that's a long ways away. But my dad has MS. His condition changes over time, and eventually that will happen, and it could come sooner than I expect, which is another reason to have these conversations so early.
And kudos to you. I really applaud you for being proactive, for your family to have that capacity to be in those conversations with each other is huge, and puts you, Tyler, miles ahead. And really, I applaud you for that. And also thank you for illuminating something that is a truth in all of this. Everyone has a story. Everyone. none of us is exempt from aging. We're all here, and every moment, each of us is aging, and there are going to be all sorts of conversations that come up along the way. And when we're open to them, we position ourselves in a way of being able to embrace, and maybe not always embrace right away, yet be with these changes and transitions in a way that honors and gives dignity to our lives.
Yeah, and it's a reality of life, whether you are in your teens and your 20s, or you're in your 80s and your 90s. Eventually, these conversations are going to have to be had, and if you have them in advance, you have a better idea of what you need to do when you get to that point. We're joined by Karen Faith Gordon, founder and owner of Karen Faith LLC, joining us on the Oakland County Megacast. You can learn more about her services and find some resources on her website at karenfaith.llc, karenfaith.llc for more information. Karen, how did you get into this particular field? What about working with patients in geriatrics was interesting to you, or drew passion from you?
I received my master's of social work degree from University of Michigan, and at the time also received my specialist in aging certificate, which now makes me chuckle because I was 23 years old holding a master's degree and a certificate that said I was a specialist in aging, which I find rather humorous. However, a few decades later, I can honestly say that I perhaps do have more wisdom and life experience that would have me feel really more grounded in talking about myself as a specialist in aging. I was very fortunate to have 4 wonderful grandparents in my life, and examples through my parents of what it looks like to love, honor, and be connected with those older adults, and how rich the history can be when we're, again, interested and connected to those people in our lives. And a lot of people don't have that. And if I can be a space for that connection for people who might not otherwise have it, the gratification, the mutual enjoyment of that connection is extremely fulfilling for me, and has been throughout my career.
Well, Karen, I won't hold it against you. You mentioned you have a master's from the University of Michigan. I, on the other hand, if I can put that correctly, I'm a Spartan guy myself. I won't hold it against you. I
Thank you.
still very much think what you're doing is fantastic. That being said, let's go back to these services that you provide. People can have these conversations on their own. They can have these conversations in their family. What about having an expert in those conversations, a social worker like yourself, can add to those conversations, make them more productive, and maybe make them easier for everybody to bear?
Well, there are questions that I will ask that will the prompt the conversation in ways that may be more productive, and maybe set a trajectory that leads to outcomes that are agreed upon by everyone in the family. You mentioned it earlier, it can be extremely difficult to get to that place of agreement when families are in patterns of sort of expectations or perceptions of each other that sort of limit their ability to have certain conversations without some turmoil or conflict. It's very, very normal for several members of a family to have different approaches and different belief systems around what end of life looks like and what approaches they think are appropriate for their loved one. Again, proactively, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing to have the person who's of concern in that conversation while they are still of a mind to be able to articulate their wishes. I think that is the greatest gift that can happen for a family, is when the person who's of concern can state their wishes, and have, when the time comes for decisions to be made, there does not need to be the turmoil amongst he said, she said, you do it, I was supposed to do it. We are fulfilling the wishes of our person who stated clearly this is what he or she wanted. I also have I'm very blessed. I'm very humbled by the relationships that I've cultivated throughout the years of the work I do. And so as a space of connection, I'm able to connect people to resources that they are going to need in the experiences that they face, whether it's relocation, whether it's finding an appropriate place to relocate to, whether it's finding a professional with whom they can work and feel has integrity, and they can trust to guide them beyond the conversations that we have together. So these are the ways in which I can come in and be I can sort of take the ball and run. At the same time, we become a team, a very connected team, and achieve a place of feeling that we're all on the same page. I think coming to those agreements around expectations is incredibly important, and also being a voice of what is possible to expect. We live in an age of information where people might come to the conversation saying, well, I know about this diagnosis because I read about it and I know someone who had it. And that's all well and good. There's space for that in the conversation. However, I'm here to say that I also am, again, immersed in these conversations with so many different individuals and families that I think sometimes I can provide some levity and also some groundedness around what is realistic to expect and what might need to be a little bit shifted or modified so that we don't, hold expectations that can't be met.
We're joined by Karen Faith Gordon, the owner of Karen Faith LLC on the Oakland County Megacast. Karen, another couple minutes with you before we'll say goodbye today. Any lasting words for those out there that may need to be having these conversations with their families or initiating these conversations with their loved ones, or any other information that would be important to know today that we haven't discussed yet?
I like to remind people that they are not alone, and in as much as and that is not to minimize those feelings and moments of aloneness. It is to say that there are resources, that there are caring professionals such as myself and wonderful colleagues that I feel very privileged to be connected with, who are here to support, to guide, to facilitate. And there are ways to move through these experiences with grace, with peace, and with ease. And it is very normal to feel caught up in the chaos, whether perceived or real, of these experiences that often come unexpectedly. And there is a place to be with someone who can understand and guide and support so that you can move through it with some grace.
KarenFaith.llc for more information. That's her website, KarenFaith.llc. Karen, appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here.